Sorry, watch out for that cord.
Yeah, well, I was trying to figure out where to put that guy.
You know what?
I think that works.
Sorry. You want me
What do
to?
you think? No, what do you think?
What else?
You can plug. You can plug mine if you want.
No, you're good.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just think I just won't
Okay.
cross because it'll be
You don't want to stand
bad.
there and get burnt out right now?
But yeah, I'm gonna end up.
That would be good. Yeah, you can come here. Do you want me to push the button for you? I can do that. I will. No, I'll do it. Yeah.
You're a button pusher.
You can just do this next slide, please. Next slide, please. Are you sure? I thought you might want to stand up there.
Well, then his recording thing.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Which is fine by me.
No, you need to
I
be.
I said if I knew this was going to be recorded, I would.
Really? Do you want us to not record it? No, we don't have to.
It's fine.
Okay. For anybody who's watching, Brandy's a little freaked out right now about being recorded, so. It's live. People are like. Yeah, you know, it was funny when we did the other one, it was live, remember? And people were texting me like, oh, I like your shoes. I was like, sweet. Your info, what else? But your shoes are nice. Do we want to, how many people are waiting for Mary Lou Retton? I don't know. I'm such a weirdo. Sorry. It is who I am. Embrace it or hate it.
Are you caffeinated or
I'm not. That's the weirdest part about it is like I'm always this way, and that's the strangest thing. And
Awesome.
And well, and even people, we've been at like DD meetings, and Sherry will go, "Why did you have so much?" And I was like, "Why? What's the problem?" She's like, "You're weirdo." I don't know. I think I'm kind of just maybe a happy person. Seriously. Well, but you know what? What's your other option? I am cranky, but only to my husband. That's my thing. He gets it, right? He totally understands and signed on for that. Right? Be nice to everyone else. You got it. So 7 people were missing. Well, is one of them me?
No.
Okay. Because Dee's son is still sleeping, so she may not make it. Because he was not feeling very well. I know. We think we have it rough. Anytime I have one of those moments, I just don't. Right? So how's everybody doing? It's new.
Great.
Yeah? Everything good? Yeah. Everything is. Whew. I woke up this morning. Bonus. That's kind of how I'm feeling right now. Woohoo! Well, we might wait a little bit. But let me tell you a little bit about this thing over here. Yeah, let's see. The one that doesn't want to be recorded,
yeah.
probably because she's like in witness protection or possibly want to get another state. Whatever, it's fine. So, allegedly, right. Miss Brandy Bertone from Goodman Schwartz, because she won't talk nicely about herself. I mean, she'll say who she is, but I will tell you. So we hired Goodman Schwartz for APAD a couple years ago. And I was on the hiring committee, so I'm a huge fan anyway, but Brandy, when it comes to legislative stuff, I've been at the legislature for going on 10 years now, and I've probably learned more in the last 2+ years with her and with Goodman Schwartz than I've ever learned, because they're amazing, and they know their stuff, and they're clear and concise, and you can ask them questions, and you know the weird questions that I ask. So, and they're always totally on top of everything, and they understand what the issues are and how, you know what it is, it's that, and I used to love this, but now I hate it, the unintended consequences, because everybody uses it. But of what we're doing could affect other groups, or what other groups are doing that could affect us, and it's a huge, huge value for us to be able to have her as part of the Schwartz team, but her in particular for the legislative piece, because like I said, I know I'm a little gushy about her, but it's just, the work they do has been amazing. And as you know, we are cut out from any cuts this year. And a big portion of that is the work, obviously, that we've done in the legislature for a long time. But seriously, having been much work for the last couple of years in particular, really focusing on some of the issues that we run into, and laser focusing on what it's going to do, how it could affect us, and again, the unintended consequences if they were. So, huge fan, and I think I actually asked her to come for the coalition because of the high level of work that they do, and because of her understanding with the legislative piece as well as a lot of other things. So I'm very thankful that she's here, and I think you guys are going to learn a lot. And she's wonderful. Oh, I'm Ann Monahan, by the way. I'm the worst. What do I think of Madonna or something? I think people should just know me. I'm Ann Monahan, more present for everything else. So, yeah. Oh, hey.
I just wanted to say, from Autism Society, they'd like to thank the coalition for being neutral on our bill. We were very appreciative so talk about unintended consequences. I mean, that was
Right.
really a gift to us.
Good.
You know, it's not everybody
Remain
neutral,
correct.
including the disability law. So our organization would like to thank you guys for.
Of course. Oh, thank you. You know what? You guys will always have those kind of conversations, and we'll always talk about where we end up on things. And some people, don't get me wrong, I'm a passionate person besides being fast. So when I am very excited about something or very passionate about something, I'm, up in your grill and oh my gosh, da, 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 da. But at that same time, there is more than just us. And I don't like to pretend that there is, but there is. So we have to be very cognizant of that when we're doing things, especially the legislature. And so you're very welcome. I was glad that you weren't like, what? Because when we looked at it and we had people for and against, really our only option was to say who remained neutral. And we felt very comfortable with that because, but that can be a little, sometimes people get upset about that at the legislature. So I'm glad that.
No, we were not. We were very.
Yeah. Well, you and I talked about it.
Yes.
And so, yeah, good. I'm glad that worked out for the best for everybody, and I feel really good about it. So, but anyway, so we had a pretty successful year at the legislature. We still have a couple issues that are going. So, Randy is going to talk about all of those fun things. Is this interactive? Should we ask questions?
Yes, please.
Okay.
I'm always more about let's have a discussion, and because I appreciate what you say, and thank you very, very much.
Of course.
But this is always a team approach, the way that Goodman Schwartz runs, the way we run for APAD, because you all in the room are really the experts on the issues that get raised with the legislature, and what I do is help get through the process, through the legislative process, and provide that background and understanding of the process to do whatever it is that you all want to do from a legislative perspective. So this is always a team approach. So including in this presentation, I want to make sure that we're having a dialogue. If you all know things that I'm not talking about, please speak up and let's help everyone get educated and understand what happened. What I wanted to start with though is just see how many of you really paid attention to the legislative session this year. Were you involved in bills, or was it sort of a sideline? You were involved in bill, obviously. Anybody else work on legislation this session, or just kind of watch in passing? And in passing, maybe.
Well, Mary, because for the coalition, we've had conversations about. I mean, you're not going to think. Does everybody know Mary? Yeah, please stand up. Do the green wave. Mary went from amazing. Oh, I did too. Stand up. Oh my God, you're leaving. Stand up. So, anyway. So, yeah, of course. So, Mary and Isaac did all of our coalition website, social media, whatever we ask him to do, he does. Mary runs the show. Because the rest of us are each have things to do. Not that she doesn't, but we brought her on because she's so great and so organized. And so we have really great plans for some of the different sessions and things we're going to offer this year, some of the rest of the year. We're so really excited about that, but I can't say enough about Mary. She's probably the one you'll hear from with emails or questions or whatever, because she's really our point person in our long way. So I I just wanted to make sure. I'm sorry. I should have. Sorry, Randy.
Nope, you're good. So what I was asked to talk about today is what happened during the legislative session. So we're going to talk about the bills in the budget, what happened during the session, and then also going to talk about things that I think are probably of interest to the coalition going forward, sort of over the next year and looking into the next legislative session about things that you all might want to be thinking about. So obviously you all know we had a new governor coming in this year. And so a lot of folks have asked us, so how did he do? And were there any surprises? And I would say generally my assessment of the session is there weren't a whole lot of surprises from our new governor. So a couple of things that he talked about at the beginning of session and even before session started in his inauguration speech was the budget. He was very clear that he wanted a balanced budget, that the budget was his main priority coming into the legislative session. And he was very clear that unfortunately there were going to be cuts. Basically that there was no way not to do cuts with the bad budget that we were walking into. So from that perspective, there were really no surprises. As you all know, there were budget cuts again, as Dan said. Home and community services were spared, but there were no surprises from that end. He was very clear, I thought, in what his priorities were going to be for the legislative session. So what was a surprise, though, was the work between the legislature and the governors. So this was my 14th legislative session and worked with a host of different governors over the last 14 years. But our obviously most recent past governor was Governor Brewer, also a Republican, former legislator. Her take on the role between the executive and the legislature was sort of a hands-off approach. The legislature is going to do its job. I'm not going to get involved, and I will weigh in as necessary when the bills come to my desk or when you bring up a budget to me. That was her approach. Governor Ducey's approach was very different, and so that was a surprise, I think, for all of us lobbyists and railbirds, that his administration was very hands-on in the legislative process from the very beginning. In fact, he worked with the legislative leadership, so President Biggs and Speaker Gowan and their appropriations chairman from the very beginning on the budget. So the reason I put this picture up, it might be a little hard to see with the light, but you've got Governor Ducey in the middle. He was introducing his budget proposal. So this was the day that his budget came out. We've got Andy Biggs on one side, President of the Senate, and Speaker Gowan on the other side, Speaker of the House of Representatives. And President Biggs had said all along, so as soon as the Governor Ducey had been elected, was if you see the two of us standing there next to him when he introduces his budget, you know we've been working well together and you know we're almost there. That we may not have all of it together, but the big pieces we've got together. And President Biggs was right. So the two of them were there up when Governor Ducey introduced his budget. And in whole and large part, the majority of the budget that was introduced by the governor got adopted. So that was the surprise and difference between Governor Brewer and what we had seen in sort of the legislative fighting between the legislature and the executive when it came to the budget. President Biggs also said we're going to have a really short session. He said, we're working really well together. We're going to get our priorities in and out, and we're going to get out of here in 65 days. Well, he really wasn't that far off. They had an 81-day session, which is the shortest session that we've had since 1968. And yeah, 68. And that session was 70. In the Constitution, the legislative session is set at 100 days, and then the Speaker and the President can extend that past a week, and then it has to go to a vote of its membership to extend past that. And as you all might remember, over the last 4 or 5 years, we haven't gotten out of session except for one time until May or June. Right. And a couple of times we didn't get out till the last day of June, or technically July 1. So this was really also a surprise for all of us to actually get done early, as predicted, in 81 days, and again very early for all of us anybody who's been involved over the last 50 years. They introduced over 1,000 bills, which is about normal. There's somewhere between 1,200 and 1,400 bills that get introduced every year. In a new year, we had a new legislature coming in. As you might know, your legislators get elected every 2 years. So about a third of the legislature changes every 2 years. So you have a bunch of freshmen that come in. And so usually in that first year, it's a little lighter than normal because the freshmen are trying to figure out how the process works. But again, relatively typical. And then 324 bills were signed by the governor, and he vetoed the 20 bills. And again, that's relatively typical as well when you're working with a Republican administration on both sides. And then, as we talked about, they passed the $9.1 billion budget, which was their biggest job for the session. So just wanted to highlight a few bills that came about that were passed that may be of interest to the coalition. This first one deals with the Department of Child Safety, and in fact, there were several bills that were passed regarding DCS as they continue to make changes and improvements in that department as it's been created. So this one talks about the Office of Special Investigations, excuse me. It also allows the Auditor General to come in and do some special audits for DCS. And again, this bill was among a package of bills of different changes for DCS. I would not be surprised if we continue to see additional changes in the Department of Child Safety as the new director came on board this year, Director McKay. I think that you'll see more changes from him, plus with the new governor. There'll be additional changes as we move forward, but this was one of the bigger bills with a host of different changes for DCS. 2417 is actually a bill that piggybacks off an initiative that was passed last year, 2 years ago, and it's on direct pay. And what happened prior to this bill is that hospitals are now required to put on their websites the direct pay price for certain services. So it's their generally billed services, sort of the most services that they do. And you can actually go onto hospital websites now and look for what they call the direct pay price and what they would charge if you were to come in and essentially pay cash. Although that is a hard number to get to. As you know, there's a lot of insurance and everything that get involved, and it probably isn't really an apple-to-apple type of comparison, but it is a requirement that hospitals now have to put on their website. So then this was passed this year that's sort of a carry forward onto that basically says if you have an insurance plan and you're paying a direct care price out of network, that's got to go towards your deductible. So if you're going to pay cash maybe someplace else or direct pay price someplace else, even if they're not in your network, it needs to count towards your deductible. So this applies starting in 2017. This has been an issue that Senator Bartow has raised over the years about if somebody wants to be able to pay the direct pay price, if they don't want to have health insurance, if they would rather pay cash, how are they able to do that, and how are they able to compare services? So I believe we're going to see more bills along this line as well. I know that the insurance companies struggled with this bill, especially because how do you do that? How do you know what goes to the insurance company? Then how do you then apply that to their deductible and make all that work? It's sort of in the system, if you will, when you're working in network. So it'll be interesting to see how this one gets implemented and how it works for the insurance companies. Yeah.
Because currently, my understanding, when I use my own insurance, I choose to pay covered, but I'm still a super bill. If it gets denied, but if so does this change for the
It's a good question. I don't know. And I'd be happy to get you the bill language if that would be helpful to take a look at. But I would work with your insurance company to understand how they're going to be implementing this requirement. It seems very similar in that it would count in place.
But these are for
Maybe
covered benefits versus
not covered.
So that's where the money.
I see, okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, what would be the reason for direct pay or covered benefit?
Well, it could be that, you know, the person, they have a covered benefit, but you're not a network. I'm on the
Out of network.
You're not a network, okay,
Right.
yeah, correct, right.
Right, or just cheaper.
That, you know, they're waiting for a pre-op and you're paying for a pre-op for 3 months. I'm just gonna go pay. It's just a way to recoup those funds, to make sure that we can account for them.
Yeah, very high deductible plan and
Yeah, a lot of them, especially with the ACA, a lot of them now are higher deductible because you don't have to pay all that much money.
so now you can pay cash essentially and stuff like it. Senate Bill 1092 is actually a bill that we've seen over the last couple of years, and it's regarding access. And what it does is it requires the administration to submit annually to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, so the federal government, for an amendment to our waiver. And so you all probably know we're a waiver state here in Arizona. It's called an 1115 waiver. So we have special permission from the federal government to have our Medicaid program set up the way we have it set up. So if we want to make any changes, we have to ask for permission to make those changes to our waiver. So to make amendments to the waiver. And what this would do, it does not apply to the Altex, so it does not apply to long-term care. We're talking the regular acute care plans. But this would ask for co-payments, it would ask for work requirements, and it would ask for lifetime limits for adults. And again, it's required that access asks the federal government, but the federal government would have to say yes for any of this to go into place. We have asked in the past for similar types of provisions regarding the co-payments and regarding limits and have been denied. I don't believe in recent years, and maybe somebody might know that we've asked for any type of work requirement. I don't believe that's a request the state has made anytime recently, but we have asked for similar provisions and have been denied. So this is a requirement that access will have to do now, but again, it's up to the federal government whether any sort of limitation on that side of the plans would go into place.
And all text, so it doesn't apply to all text.
Correct.
Right.
So
No
this-
long-term care.
yeah,
This is just the acute care,
This
regular
is the
health.
difference if you talk about between, when people think of Medicaid, who do you think of? I mean, and the general pop, not us. because we
The
work
general
with it,
population.
But general population, think Medicaid, and they think of three, four, and I'm paying for them while they're eating lobster, if you watch Fox News. So, but my point is with that, is that's the Medicaid you're talking about here. Because we're completely, there's two goals in my mind.
That's what everybody knows, is that
Exactly.
the adults
Who are
and
sitting
the
home
working
not
adults.
working and we're paying for everything for them. So this is their way, whether that's true or not, this is their way to say, okay, if you're gonna have these types of benefits, here's some of the things that you're gonna have to acknowledge and deal with and work with within the system itself. It's not uncommon, I mean, especially when it's for the acute care plan.
So I'm
that
just
really-
curious, though, for all text, what if they want to change their code?
So that's interesting. So this bill doesn't touch that, but I do think it's important for all of us to be aware of this from an Altex perspective, that what if the federal government did say yes on the acute care, non-Altex side to something like that? Then would there be a want or a need from the legislature, the executive, to then want to implement something on the Altex side? So that's one of the reasons we watch these types of issues from the long-term care side, is what happens on the acute care side can sometimes impact the long-term care side when they get permission to make some of those changes. So I think it's just important for us to watch to see what the federal government does.
And if they have that discussion, that would be something that we would, the coalition, APAC, the Autism, all those groups get together and say, okay, again, this is trying to get the legislature and the general population to understand that distinction and see the difference between the two very different populations.
Absolutely.
So,
And this is probably a good time, it's in a future slide, but so what was also in the budget was some similar requirements to ask the federal government for some co-payments and some limits on service, and that was part of the budget. So there's actually a separate process that's going forward for those changes as well. And those requirements were asked for in the budget based on Indiana. So Indiana actually recently asked for several types of requirements in their plan. Now they're a different type of waiver. They're not the same type of plan that we have for their Medicaid program. And they implemented a host of changes. So it's not an apples to apples comparison, but they were allowed to do some co-pays. They were allowed to do some limits. And so basically what our legislature and governor looked at and said, well, if Indiana could get it, maybe we could get some of that too. So there is a separate process that's going through the budget where access will ask for some other limits as well. And so I think, again, to the same point, it's important for us to watch to see whether or not the state gets that permission and then what impact that might have on the Altex side. Senate Bill 1257 is one of the initiatives. So the governor talked greatly about reducing the size of government. And one of his recommendations that was in his state budget was to move behavioral health services from the Department of Health Services to Access. And so this was a budget initiative, so it did pass in the budget, but Senate Bill 1257 is actually the legislation and the changes in the actual statute that make that actually work. It doesn't become effective until July 1 of next year. So right now what's happening is the two agencies are working administratively together to try and figure out how this is going to work. So they had a hearing this session to talk about this bill and what the two agencies believe are going to happen. In their testimony, what they talked about is that nothing will change from on the services side. This is strictly administrative at this point. So the contracts that are in place here in Maricopa County, for example, cannot change. They can't change any of the contracts that they just awarded for Northern and Southern Arizona that become effective October 1. What will literally happen is we're just moving them from one agency to the other, and they're literally taking a look at the staff needs. So what services does DHS provide right now that Access doesn't have, and can we move those staff folks over to Access to still do those same types of services? Where is there duplication? Is Access already doing some auditing that DHS already does, and can we use the similar staff to do the same type of audits? So at this point right now, it's administrative and a change. What we have all been watching, and the reason it's important to watch this, is then what happens in a couple of years when some of those contracts do start to come up. So now Access will be in charge of putting out those contracts, of putting the requirements in the contracts that they want in there. And so what will that look like, and how will that change what potentially the services are that are available on the behavioral health side? So for right now, no changes in services, but it is something to watch and see how the administration changes, and then see what priorities Access will have when it's time for them to be in charge of putting out these contracts when they come up for renewal. Yeah, please.
You mentioned about Will and then about the successor for DHS.
So Director Will Humble, former director of the Department of Health Services, he actually agreed to stay on as the director, and then about a month into the legislative session chose to leave. And so the department does not have a director at this point. They have an interim director who's actually Corey Nelson, the current director of behavioral health services in the Department of Health Services. So that agency is still going under transition, and they're still looking for a new director. But yeah, Director Humble is no longer with the agency.
That's not supposed to be jobs. I mean, I was like, and he was always. It's nice to have a partner help with you.
Definitely understood the long-term care side of things and how his agency impacted that, and in behavioral health where you have those individuals that were maybe in both systems, how that worked. But yeah, I would agree, he definitely understood that. So Mercy Maricopa, so no changes at this point. Their contract stays, their contract goes over to Access. It will be when their contract comes up for renewal, what will that look like, and what will Access maybe want to make changes into their contract, but no changes to services at this point.
So any of the reloads that you guys deal with?
So Mercy Maricopa, if I remember correctly, ended up with a 5-year contract. So what happened prior to Mercy Maricopa is it used to be 3-year contracts with 2 1-year renewals for a total of 5. It really ended up being 5. When they put out the one for Maricopa County, they said, why are we doing it this way? Why, when really in reality it ends up being a 5-year contract? So if I recall correctly, and someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Mercy Maricopa is 5 years, and that's also what they did for the 2 new units going forward. So it's now a 5-year contract.
I just think this is a discussion that we're going to have to keep right on the front line, because I think behavioral health is going to roll quite a bit in what we're doing. I think we're looking at a lot of different things, so this is something that we'll probably be talking about. You're so informative, Brandy.
Senate Bill 1400 deals with human rights committees, and so these are
like human rights. Can you pass this one?
You want to pass it?
Okay.
Okay, I'm sorry. If you're not familiar with the human rights committees, so they deal with behavioral health and developmental disabilities, and under statute, they say that they provide independent oversight of the care that is happening for the individual and where the client's rights protected in the care that they've received. And so this bill makes changes to the information that those human rights committees can get and have the ability to look at, and specifically the quality of care reports, which was an issue that some folks have raised down at the Capitol, that should these types of committees get to see the quality of care reports where personal information is in there, and is that really their role? So I know that was debated during the session, but it did pass that way, and it was in there. So that those committees do get a little bit more information than they have in the past.
You know, I'm
Go ahead. No, thanks.
There's snacks and coffee. And I would just put there, like, sitting there and no one's eating anything. I think you're sweet.
Yeah,
But
get some.
if you guys would please grab like a coffee or a muffin, I got two people who are in compliance. The rest of you are not. So, you got water, good job, that's good. Something, just feel free to, you know, you can get up and grab a muffin. She'll keep going. She's
I will.
professional.
And I'll take whatever's left over.
Oh my
you know,
God,
at the
I love
office.
Brandy.
So it's David's birthday. We'll celebrate David's
Oh, that's
birthday.
right.
Yes.
There you go. You should have a cold coffee and 3 shoot-on muffins. Hey, Joel, happy birthday.
David Schwartz. He's the Schwartz of Goodman Schwartz.
Yeah,
My boss.
Stuart Goodman and David Schwartz, and they are, I just adore them. They're just wonderful, wonderful people. And so he's going to get from me a stale muffin.
There you go. Senate Bill 1440 is actually a bill that APAD worked on heavily during this legislative session, and it appropriates $100,000 to the Client Services Trust Fund. If you're not familiar with the trust fund, this was a fund that was set up several years ago when the state sold off one of its institutions for the developmentally disabled. They put $4.25 million in the fund and used the interest to provide grants to families and individuals to help them stay in their home or in their family home. So for example, they need a ramp up to the door, they need a ramp on a van, they need a special shower stall, they need a special mattress. It's those things that maybe insurance didn't cover, they couldn't find somewhere else in the community. This gives them that help up to $3,500 to get them what they need so that they can live at home. Obviously that's cheaper for the state, and then obviously better for the individual as a whole. Unfortunately, this was one of the funds that was swept during the 08-09 bad budget times. There were a lot of fund sweeps that happened in the state.
We call it the tribal piece of crap and crack town.
There you go. She can say that. And unfortunately, the money's never been replaced either. And so as of right now, without the $100,000, essentially the fund goes away at the end of this fiscal year. They were going to be making their last set of grants. They had about $14,000 left. So the $100,000 is really nothing compared to what they used to have. They were able to make between $100,000 and $200,000 worth of grants annually. So this $100,000 probably only takes them another year or two, but it was at least something to keep them going to provide those needs in the community that weren't being able to met. Again, they looked for insurance and other issues and community support before they came for the grants, and so it was helping folks stay at home.
Well, and that's the thing, keeping us, I mean, we were talking to the legislature, the legislative works about this. They would say, okay, so if somebody can't get this ramp, you're going to go to a group home. We're going to be, so really, you're going to be paying just as much, if not more. And because it was swept, it wasn't, you know, again, and hey, Aaron, fingers crossed, fingers muffins, and water.
I'll take this chair.
And that chair. So because it was swept and they really were left with hardly anything, it started out last year, we would like $2 million. We would like $6. I mean, it just went like to nothing. And so this year when we were able to get through, super excited because $100,000 in the budget is nothing, you know that, but at the same time, it will really, really impact some families and some people that really need the help and can just simply honestly know themselves to them. So it's a really cool grant program that's set up and it's really neat how this affects people's lives. This is one that I was like, yes, you know, it's only 100,000.
It's interesting, you know, over the years doing budget issues, sometimes I think trying to get $100,000 or $150,000 is harder than trying to get $4 or $5 million or $100 million. Partly because $100,000, you know, that's the mortgage. I know, I can feel what that is. I can relate to that amount. I can't relate to $5 million. And so I think, or more than that. And so I think from a legislative perspective, sometimes they relate as well, and so it's almost harder sometimes to get these small token amounts than it is some of the larger amounts. Yes,
Yeah.
we're gonna work on that.
We're
We're working on that. Got it. This was mentioned a little earlier, Senate Bill 1459, I believe, on substitution requirements, and probably there's folks in the room can talk more better about this than I can, but this did pass this legislative session. I don't know, did anybody want to add anything or specifics on this?
Basically, it says 4 things. You can only use restraining seclusion for the protection of the child or someone else. So it can no longer be used for punishment or compliance. It says that the parents have to be notified within 24 hours, which has not been happening. It says that if it happens more than once, that they need to consider hiring a BCBA and doing a longitudinal analysis to fix the problem. And then it talks about stability. So it wasn't everything we wanted, and Arizona disability law came out against it because they felt like it wasn't good enough. But we're satisfied with what we got. The governor signed it and then announced that he was planning on running a bill next year for immunity to the school districts. And I'm just here to tell you all that that will not happen. Over my dead body.
Over my dead body.
We fought every step of the way in immunity clause. The school districts want immunity, so if they kill or injure a child, they will not be responsible. And there's no way ever that that is acceptable to us. And the good news is that one of the legislators that really helped us was Eddie Farnsworth, who has a child who has a disability. And there were several times that our bill was going to be killed and restated. And one of his things on that deal was if there's an immunity clause, it's a dead bill. I'm not going to accept it. So I don't think the governor has any help.
Well, not if you have anything to say about it.
That's exactly. Can you tell us what we're all
I'm all right with that. I'm doing the weight.
So, but we're taking it as a win because he did sign it into law, and we'll see what happens. I mean, right now he's taking it too because he signed into law and then he can still complain about it. So, yeah. But we're pretty proud about it. We've worked on it since 2009. I don't know if all of you know, but we had passed other legislation that made suggestions and policies for the districts, but they weren't actually following their own policies. So now there's a little skin in the game.
Now there's parts of the law.
So I just another update on Arizona Association for Behavior Analysis Legislative Committee work. We've been talking about this a lot and looking into it. And our worries all along have been like, well, how will people report this? Will they just kind of go underground and sort of not report these things for fear of, retaliation or reputation getting into trouble? So right now there's no rules surrounding how the school districts have to comply with this. First, not yet. We're hoping that ADE will work with Gabby Within and a couple of other people in the community that specialize in public legal supports to help us help them flush out those rules for how schools are going to be implementing these procedures and what that training needs to say, what the reporting period is exactly, how it's reported. We're hoping that they will let us do that, but the worry is maybe that everybody will sort of do their own thing.
Yes, and the one thing that was none of that they tried to add to the bill was that parents could sign a waiver saying that they didn't have to be notified. And we strongly went against that because, of course, we help families that if they refuse to sign things, the district will go to call CPS and have their kids removed. So there's no way we can have any kind of waiver when parents sign a waiver, right? Because then the school district will be notified. The bill does say that they have to be notified either in writing or text or phone. I mean, so they have some choices to do that. And obviously, it's not perfect, but it's a good. We're thinking about like K rights, just baby step our way all the way there.
Anything else on 14th agenda that anybody wanted to add? Yeah, very good idea. Thank you. So that was the last piece of legislation that I wanted to bring up. Is there any other pieces of legislation that anybody worked on in here that Anybody else want to bring up? Did I miss anything in that you can think of?
Kelly Ward had a bill that we killed. She wanted to run autism insurance legislation again. And we said no because, first of all, we agreed not to run anything for 10 years. That was the deal that we did. And it hasn't been 10 years. But also, we felt like the bill that she was running wasn't actually, didn't address the problems that may be there. We were addressing things that we don't see as problems. So she is interested in running something at some point. And I think it would be helpful if the coalition could meet with some of the autism moms, because I think there's a real misunderstanding about what is actually being covered by insurance, like what you agencies are seeing, what problems are you having. So we don't want to be running bills that are actually helping the agencies get paid for by insurance. And I've heard some rumblings of some people talking about running autism insurance who aren't familiar with autism insurance. And I'm like, oh, hold the phone. You don't even actually know what you're talking about. You don't have any waters. But I do think that might be something we need to have community meet and address.
What was her bill for?
She wanted to get rid of the age cap and raise the money. But I talked to Leanne, and really, we weren't seeing people be denied by age anymore. We're not seeing that. And then we're not seeing it being money cuts anymore. It's more visit cuts, that kind of thing. So we were able to kill it, but I think it's going to come back. And if it comes back, we want it to be something that's going to legitimately help our community and not waste our time here on capital.
And I appreciate that. And if you guys hear anything, I mean, Cynthia, John comes to this, I got a couple questions and stuff. And, having those types of dialogues are very important because it does, as much as the intent with a lot of the legislators is a good intent, or they think they're helping. Yeah, it's just not really fully understanding the whole process, maybe not understanding what you're trying, if you add this and this can affect this. It's just that type of a thing. And so, yeah, for sure, the coalition is
And I
always.
am nervous because I'm attending too many people more where parents have announced that they want to run autism insurance legislation. I'm like, well, what do you understand about autism insurance legislation? I don't know anything about it.
Did you tell them that we already have it?
Yes, autism insurance. I'm like, well, come on, I'm sorry. Well, it's like somebody tell you that.
Okay.
Even at South yesterday, I was in a meeting, and it was one other thing that they wanted to run legislation. I'm like, I don't understand if you don't understand the process. You have people who are involved who don't understand that way insurance. Right. And then they're talking about their needs that are not really actually true. But I think it would be helpful if, at least for me, if I had some data from the agencies who are actually filling that consistent basis. What their insurance
Or they're getting denied or who's going to.
Yeah, let's put that on the docket.
Self-funded ones.
Yeah, well, they don't
Well,
have
yeah.
to, so that's okay. But here's the other thing though, with the ACA exchange, some other thing that's happening is that we really should have seen or should see additional services coming through. And, it's, as much as it is a mandate, I've seen a lot of insurance carriers that don't care what they're doing. In the sense of, not that they're not going to cover it, but in the sense of, oh yeah, they have these through behavioral health or through counseling or whatever. They're modifying things as they go, and the fact that the codes have changed, DSM-5, ICD-10 is supposed to roll out in October. There's a lot of stuff happening right now that if people aren't a little careful, like you're saying, Cynthia, it could be really disastrous for those of us who are actually doing the work, and for the people receiving the benefits, because the state is also looking at this and has been looking at this, and it's on our access. Or quarterly access meetings we go to, because I do. I think they may be, because last time whenever we were there, she said, we need our own staff person just for you. I'm okay with it.
Yeah, go in.
That person, then, okay. So, but has it not for 2 years, the whole coding and who pays for what and how that, it's still on your.
She represents you all well, brings up every time.
It's like old business, and they'll look at me. It doesn't have to be old business if you just do it. It could be brand new business if you just did it. But Shelley last time, she's their financial person, was like, see, we made it long enough, now the codes have changed. So we can just maybe look at those. So, yeah.
So I have seen more services. When I worked on the autism insurance legislation, my husband's policy didn't cover it, it wasn't going to be self-funded.
Yeah.
And every mom that worked on that bill had self-funded policies.
Yeah, no, Char was like, Stephen can't get Stephen's law.
Yeah.
I remember.
And now I'm here to tell you that every mom that worked for that still has a self-funded policy, and it has that has been something that getting what Stephen don't want.
Well, and when you have people that are empowered, you're exactly right, that are empowered to talk about it with their HR departments or, you know, the need, we have enough people that are willing to say, we really want this benefit. It's something that companies can really look at because we have data now that says it's not going to kill you. It's not going to cost you $90 million a year, like everybody said. So yeah, this is definitely.
I just don't want to see it ruined, and
I agree, and I appreciate that very much.
Cynthia, what are the motivations of all these different people and groups that
You know,
produce the
one of the
legislation?
moms, God bless her, she's a 5-year-old and she's just excited to create change. And when I finally sat down to ask her, like, what is happening, she actually didn't even know that there was autism insurance.
Just a
She just was like, we're gonna
go
create
get it.
change, and she wasn't really aware of what was out there. And then actually the one that was more disturbing was one of the moms that worked on the autism insurance legislation was like, we need to run this and this is what we need. And I'm like, you cannot need this thing. You are a mom looking at your insurance, you're not talking to agencies or hearing what they're doing or not doing. And you're using all the wrong language, so slow your roll.
I know you're fired up. I know.
Yeah. Nervous.
Yeah.
Well, no, I'm very glad that you're part of that.
So I
So
just
is
wanted
Kelly
to-
Ward a legislator?
She is,
Yes.
So why did she want to run the bill?
because she's got,
She have a mom that talked to her that goes for her?
She has some pet projects, and autism, she decided was one of them. Only she doesn't really know anything about autism.
which is interesting because there's two people there at the legislature, one in particular who has a child who has autism, and it's completely like, what?
Yeah,
So it's an interesting dynamic.
but we have to remember Kelly Ward is planning on running against McCain.
She's exploring. Yeah.
She's exploring, so I feel like she's doing some groundwork for some other things. So we're just gonna keep our eye on that.
Senator Ward's a physician. She's an emergency room physician, and also has done, I believe, pediatric care. If I'm not mistaken, in a previous life before emergency care. So she comes from a healthcare background.
Super smart. And very
Right.
nice.
Yeah. And so she tends to take a lot of these healthcare issues up personally.
Okay.
She's done a lot of things on access, just from generally seeing access patients in the ER. For example, she had a bill this year that I believe passed that if an individual, we call them frequent flyers, hits the ER multiple times, I want to say the bill said 4 times inappropriately, if you will, so for a non-emergency use, that the health plan then needs to report that to access, and they need to provide counseling to help find out why this individual was going to the ER so much, and can we find another place for you to go. So she's worked on those kinds of pieces of legislation as well. But you are right, she is exploring to run against Senator McCain.
So they're kind of looking for causes that, they could use my help, and
Yeah.
but they don't really use all the
She didn't
research.
really understand, like, we had to really educate her about why that actually.
She probably looked up the law and was like, well, if
Yeah.
it's funding, that'll be good.
And I'm like, so when I called Annie, I was like, because I said, I don't hear these complaints
Yeah, exactly.
from families, and Anne's like, no, these are our complaints.
It's a good topic, right?
So we went back, and not to mention that we did give in good faith. 10
Right,
years.
that's part of the big
I didn't
issue.
know that. That's interesting.
Is
That's
that,
part of the
and
deal.
you
You
can
made a
change
different vote.
it, you can change it any time, I mean, it's not like you couldn't.
Yeah.
But she's right, she's like, well, this
That's
first
credibility,
passed,
though.
we said, hey, we're not really gonna touch it, because, but, the way to get around it, in the sense of, if somebody wants to run something, and it's right, and helping them, is because of the changes, because remember when this went through ACA, none of that was all a big old word. So now we have, but look at all these other components, so even though we agree, we can show you, kind of like you and I were talking about, 80% of whatever population companies are actually covering this on one form or another, and if you want to make it more regulated, you get that, it's all good. So I just,
And I think they would be like that too.
and I think so too.
So we
I
gotta
think
run the right one. That's not really-
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and again, making sure that the insurance carriers are on board, which they're not gonna be because they don't want to pay more. But at the same time, we're able to prove to them because now we do have data. Like, I mean, it's not perfect data, don't get me wrong, but it's not, remember when it was first, it was like, oh, it's gonna cost us
Yes,
$50 million a
It's a
kid.
guesstimate.
It was, and now we actually have to go back and say, well, not much. And so, anyway, so yeah, there's a lot we can do with it, and those are the kind of things that really excite me, and that's why I drive Randy here much for the same. So, because I make her be part of it, I'm like, oh, be part of it.
Well, this is why the coalition and other groups like you all are so important, is that you have the knowledge base in the room, each individually, and then together to go down to the legislature and say, hey, wait a minute, you're running this bill, but did you know this? And did you know this? I mean, those are the important things, and they really do want to hear from groups like you all because you do have the expertise. We actually we also represent AAA of Arizona, and we ran a bill 3 years ago on move over. I know this is way off topic, but I'll get there. And it was on move over legislation. So prior to what we had done, you only had to move over one lane or slow down if it was a police officer or an ambulance. And from AAA's perspective, it was, well, if anybody's on the side of the road, you should move over. What if you're a driver waiting for the police to show up? What if you're a tow truck driver, trying to, help the person get their car off the road? And so we changed that law. And a bill was introduced this session by a member that was trying to do the same thing we had already done. And so we called up the member and said, hey, we've worked on this. This is why. Here's the law. Here's the legislation. This is why we passed it. And he was trying to include tow truck drivers. And he just didn't think that the current law did. And we said, hey, no. So it's that background, it's that information, it's the paying attention and watching it. Groups like this really need to do to help the legislators because, they have to run for re-election every 2 years. And so imagine how much information you're trying to take in as a new person and just every 2 years trying to keep up to speed on all of that. So that's why this coalition and others are so important, is to keep that information flow going so legislators do get the right information.
Absolutely.
How frequently do the duplicated laws get passed? Is that a common issue?
I don't know. I mean, lots of similar
Or
laws
like
get
conflicting
passed.
laws, and then
I would say
maybe
there's a lot of fix-it bills, right? So you pass legislation this year, and then you realize, oops, we forgot this, or oh, we didn't make this cross-reference, or oh, there's a negative consequence here, and so then the next year you're fixing it. So there's a lot of fix-it bills, I would say, that happen just, with the frantic pace of session, and just you don't, sometimes until the law is implemented, you don't realize what, that negative consequence might mean. You can fix it. So there's definitely a lot of that.
Well, we're always up for educating peeps down there, so because even though you're employed by ATAG, if we could afford you, we would totally get you, but you're way too good. So they'd rather get my ghetto lobbying for free than having to pay for it. So, but my point with that is, as you run into these things, we've had these discussions before with happening with ATAG and other things like that, when there are those offshoots that really do affect, because even though ATAG is for DV providers, it's only for DV providers. So it's not behavioral health, it's not, it is, because everybody kind of has. Everybody has those little.
Providers do multiple services.
We
right.
do multiple services, but ATAG is specific to DV.
Right.
So where we are a little more, schools and doctors and all that kind of stuff. So anytime you run or into those things or have questions or whatever, I've always said we're always a resource, and we love to educate, whether you are the legislators. I know you guys, I trust you guys, you're all super smart. You can come down, and if we have an issue going on, and hey, meet me down there, and we're going to talk to Senator so-and-so, Representative so-and-so, and there are times when I'm truly at the lack of knowledge on certain issues. And it's not their fault. You can't know everything all the time about all stuff. But they all have their own little piece. Oh, I'm agriculture, or I'm business, or I'm right? And so you really do have to take the time to educate them. And so we are always here, Mandy, and always a resource. You just want to do something, go, hey. And she sends me stuff sometimes, just like, hey, I don't know about that. How weird. I'm like, oh, so that kind of communication is really very valuable to us.
It's I always call the legislature, it's high school for adults. So it's fun. It's us chasing around rumors and gossiping, right? And trying to figure out where the real story is and where the real information is. And that's how we all figure out what's happening or not happening.
It's so true though. It's obvious. Sometimes like you see somebody in the hallway walking out and you're like, arguing, you're like, oh God. Okay, they're fighting. And they're like arguing and there's a lobbyist and then there's, it's seriously like, yeah. I told you something or something and so and they're freaking out.
I just tried to tell you, like, you know, I literally feel how I live in it.
So to talk about some really fun stuff, thought we'd talk a little bit about, again, what passed in the budget, just to make sure everyone's aware and on the same page, what was passed. So wanted to just highlight a few provisions. Please ask questions if there's other things that you're curious about. There was $1.2 million appropriated to Adult Protective Services and 11 FTEs, so those are individuals, they're new hires. For their caseload growth in APS has grown dramatically over the last few years. They've actually appropriated $3.2 million last year as well. So this is an additional $1.2 million trying to help with their caseload growth.
So just so you guys know too, if you hear this, because I have heard this, there wasn't a focus on DED at when we were there for like the folks and stuff. They were, DES was focused on APS because there's, and this is an internal thing, we kind of talk, kind of like the workshop, you know, you're talking, you're like, is that bad? And they're like, yeah, they're worried about APS. So their whole budget appropriations talk was APS, even though DED is 83 or whatever it is percent, whatever percent
of the general fund.
Yes,
yeah.
Budget. But they were like, these guys got it. They're good. We're focusing on APS because so if you hear them, oh, they didn't even stick. No, there was a rationale behind it. They're not just like, you know, there was a reason. Because I was like, why the hell are they talking about us? And then we found out why. Brandy found out why.
So you all know about the access provider cuts. So excluded from that were nursing facilities and home and community-based services. But did want to bring this up for those of you who might do other services or involved with other folks. So just as a reminder, this was a 5% aggregate cut. So access has to find whatever that dollar amount is, 5% to cut. But that doesn't mean that that's a 5% cut to an individual provider. It could be more than a 5% cut or less than a 5% cut. They're basically going to make those cuts as they see necessary, see fit, based on the public comment, and then it's got to equal a total of that 5% aggregate cut. So we've been pushing very hard for providers who were not excluded to make sure that they're providing public comment to access. And I've got a slide with a link, so when you guys go up on the website, gives up the link to the comment.
And that's important to make comments because they read those.
They really do.
So if you say, oh my gosh, behavioral health, oh my gosh, you know, this service or that service,
yes.
This is where we are, this is the area, and this is what's going to do if we get cut. The other thing we have to be cut, which is right. There can be things that are held harmless completely within access, and then one could be cut 10%, one could be cut 7%, one could be cut 2%.
Absolutely.
To make up that $30 million or $80 million, $150 million, whatever that. Do we know what that is?
I have the number. It was like 32 million, I think, between both access and DHS.
Okay. So, so they just have to find that dollar amount. It just depends on what buckets they decide.
Exactly.
So if you're thinking, okay, well, we're getting a cut, that may not be the case. You have to make your case with them to say, this is what's going on, and please don't cut us, and this is why we really hope you don't cut us. Or if you do, make it minimal, 0.5%, or, you know, just, it's important to make sure you're doing this because that's what they look for.
Yep.
And they have stakeholder meetings and they have that specifically to get that information so they can go back and say, holy crap, 90% of the population that deals with behavioral health says this. That's a problem. When we don't, you guys, they go, well, yeah, it's fine. It's no big deal. When we don't make the effort to send an email, make a call, whatever. So just make sure that if it is going to affect you, you are saying something about it. You need your voice on there because the next time when they say, well, we only got 25 people that said, okay, you know, it's an issue.
And the other piece of it too is I think it's important. All of these comments are public record. They're on the website today. Right now, you can go on access the website and see all the comments they've received since April 24th. And that also means legislators can also see it as well. So when you think about the next legislative session and what might happen and what the budget's going to look like then, which we're going to talk about, I think it's important to not only educate access, but you're also educating the legislators as well for potential other cuts that might be coming down the pipe. And then obviously education was a huge deal in the budget for the legislature. So they did cut K-12 non-classroom spending, and then they increased their formula growth. So that's where you get this argument between the executive and what the schools are saying about you got cut, but you didn't get cut, you have more money than you started with. That's where you see the discrepancy in the numbers. So a couple of other provisions, DES is allowed to, this was, let me back up a little bit. So in the budget, you've got the feed bill, which is all the little, the numbers, right? So it's literally what you would see like on an account statement and the numbers and the line items that they're appropriating. And then you have a bunch of other bills that come along with the budget that are statutory changes that either make the changes necessary to implement to get the cost savings, or they're just other changes that they decide to make in the budget. So in the budget, just another change they decided to make is that DES is now allowed to contract with a new private intermediate care facility. So they had one private care facility today. They could now contract with others. They also created a new operating budget for the department, the Division of Developmental Disabilities. So prior to this change, which will come effect on July 1, all of the division's money is in sort of one lump sum bucket. And within that, the division divides it up and they know what they're doing, but they're able to kind of move things around as they need. And you all might be aware that the division has done that over the last several years, trying to help one bucket when it needs help or move money over here because of a federal government cut, those kinds of things. What the budget did is create an operating line item and then a separate case management line item. So now really your case management and your operating expenses now have to be reported separately. And if you're going to go in between those two funds, you also have to let the Joint Legislative Budget Committee, so the budget office of the legislature and the executive, know that you're making those changes. So I highlight this because I think it's important that one, all of us are going to be getting more information, right, about how those changes, what the division is doing with the money and how they're spending it. But that also means there's going to be more scrutiny on that. And sometimes the agency flexibility is really important. And maybe sometimes we don't want the agency to have some flexibility. So it kind of depends on which side of the coin we're on that issue. But we all will be getting just that same information now about really where that money is going. And now that the Division of Developmental Disabilities is the majority of the Department of Economic Security's general fund budget, I also think that that scrutiny will be very high on the division for cost savings. It is 70, 80, we always talk about this number, percent of their general fund budget. So if DES needs to get general fund savings from the agency, where's it going to come from?
Right.
So,
yeah. We're 80% of our budget. I'm not sure candidate or unemployment is going to be chopping.
Well, because you talk about this, DES's budget is 1.3 billion. I mean, it's a huge number, right? But that's because of all the federal money that's in there. So the federal money we can't do anything about when it comes to a state general fund deficit. So you really got to look at the general fund dollars because that's where they're going to cut. That's the only place they can cut. And so that's when you look at the Division of Developmental Disabilities, and that's their biggest pot. And
we're at 67 cents to 33 right now. So for every 33 cents the state is going to pull down 67 cents of federal money. So when you discuss that with the legislature, the legislators, they say, yeah, but if we don't have the money in the general fund, if I don't have that 33 cents, how am I supposed to pull down anyway? Right? So their argument is, because we're saying you're going to lose all this money, really, because you are, right? Twice as much, basically. And you're going to lose all this money, and they go, yeah, but if I don't get the original amount in the first place, it won't matter. That's their big. So we do kind of hit on that point. Quite a bit of how much money in federal transfer for money.
Are there any other programs in the state budget that have that kind of
I don't know what education is.
I'm sure there are others that have a,
It's because
3 to
of
1 or
our
something.
waiver, our level
Right.
15 waiver, and what we get from CMS, and how we do the services. And there's only, I think, I want to say 9 other states, not even 9, maybe 8, that have 11-15 waivers. The rest are 19. We're really in the minority when it comes to that, and it gives us a lot of flexibility to be able to do some kind of function stuff if we wanted to, which is great. And that's fine and good, but that also gives us, it can be really tenuous because things like voc rehab and other things like that, those services are federally, the majority of them, dress, some of the other ones are federally based services where you're going to get cash, where you're going to get money from a federal program versus a state program. So it's a difficult kind of dance, I guess, because even though you go, hey, we get all this money from the federal government, we get legislators that go, I don't want it. I don't want anything. Medicaid should be gone. You have to look at Medicaid of all this down there. So, but I call it. So, yeah, exactly. But the only ones that I know that, I mean, there's a lot of places that have federal funds and Medicaid are medicated ones that I know of.
And the match, so the state match, even though it's the 2 to 1 or 3 to 1 depending on when you're looking at it, that's a lot of money, right, for the Medicaid program. So it's not like there are some programs that the state match might be $1,500,000, whereas now you're talking millions.
I just love the word match though, because I know I don't match, or you use it. The 30% and 67 match. Because I don't get the state, the federal match. It should be like the federal, what state was and whatever they got.
Right, exactly. Whatever you have, we'll take it.
What do you got?
There was another program that was eliminated in the budget, and I apologize, I don't know much about this. It's my understanding that the Rural Autism Parenting Program, so this was put into the budget last year, $300,000, and the program never really got started, and so that's the reason that they pulled it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is this the one, we got like an RFP about it and responded and they're like.
So they-
"We're
yeah.
we're not
Just
ready."
kidding.
Yeah.
We're like, hooray. Oh.
They never got far enough down the line, and so this was an easy pull to take back some money.
The intent was really good in the sense of, hey, when you're talking about people remotely, it's really, really hard. So
Right.
the intent behind it was good, but because it was so brand new and there wasn't an investment in it, they literally were like,
There were a couple other programs like this that they had funded in the budget prior, but the program hadn't really ever started, and so they're like, well, we might as well just take that money back, essentially, is what they did. And then I skipped this one because I wanted to talk a little bit about it. So what was also in the budget was a cap on growth, so a cap on the capitation rate, essentially, if you will, for Access and for DHS. And so they cap it for fiscal year 17 and 18 at 1.5%. So what the budget that we just passed, fiscal year 16, which starts July 1, and so the cap that they implemented was for 17 and 18. Now, there's a little bit of debate on this. One legislature can't find another legislature. So the next legislature can come in and make any of these changes. This isn't a definite. It can't happen. The other thing is you can't really cap the capitation rate because Access and DHS are the ones who set the capitation rates. So, but what I think is important to know is this is obviously where the legislature and the governor are heading. They clearly see that they need to have more cost savings in Access and DHS. I think that's what it shows. So they may not be able to do it this way, but I think that it shows the intent and where they're headed. And when we talk about developmental disabilities, I mean, the division has grown at 4.5% over the last few years. So even just each year. So even if you're looking at a 1.5%. So this is, it's utilization, it's people, it's all of that rolls into the cap,
and
right?
what this rubs right against, Erin, is we can't have waiting lists based on our waiver.
Right.
So you're in a situation, and this is, she and I have these conversations.
No, please.
No, because when I'm at the DES budget meeting, and I'm looking at the budget, and I see, oh, we got this in there, 3.5 in 2010, and 3.9 in 2011, and 4.2 in 2012, and 4.5 and 20. And if you see that kind of exponential growth, then they come out with, oh, we're just going to cap it out at 1.5. Good luck with that.
What does that even mean?
Well, it just means work. I'm sorry.
No, it's not. What it means, so Access and DHS, what they do is they do an analysis of where growth in people, growth in utilization, and growth in services are going to happen. And so then they set what's called that capitation rate. And that capitation rate is what funds services. So that is the pot of money that is going to fund services. So when the legislature comes in and says, okay, when you make that calculation, you can only calculate growth at 1.5%, they're then stifling the amount of that increase that they could have.
So more people could still enroll, but then they'd have to find ways to cut the rates or the dollars or whatever.
Right. I mean, if more people enroll, so what does that mean? Well,
Still no waiting.
right. So are we cutting
Well, you know what they're saying out
services?
of no waiting right now.
Right.
And this is important, and I think I want everybody to understand this, because there's a very big difference. Especially when you talk to the legislature, I'm sorry.
No, please.
But the no waiting thing, they will tell you that the members aren't waiting for services. They've been given services by the division. They're waiting for providers. So they can say, we don't have a waiting list. And at the same time, say our network may not be sufficient in the sense of right now therapies, PT, OT, speech, and nursing. They increased all 4 of those because they can't find people because everybody wants to do it. Medicaid, right? And they are out of compliance with CMS and Medicare and Medicaid services because they were required to have a solid network, a network of providers. So they can say, we have a great network. Look at all our providers. We have 527 qualified vendors. And that doesn't include 2,000 independents. So we're good with our network. We have plenty of people. But the problem is, provider theory, you don't have somebody to work with my kids. It's not that I'm not giving you the services. You just don't have somebody to work with them. I mean, just take them care. But you know what I'm saying? That's what they're
But
saying.
if all of a sudden the providers could do that, then how do they control that growth? Right?
They won't. They
can't.
can't. That's why this
It's
is
not really a hard
this
task,
isn't,
right?
This isn't Brandy talking. This is being aggressive. But the thing is there's 2 things happening with this. And even though we didn't get a cut, I want to make sure everybody's very well aware of the utilization. So when people start talking about less utilization, meaning not as many services, not as many people getting services, all of those
How
things.
many hours?
DES exactly even mentioned that in your budget, that utilization could be an issue. So even though we didn't get cut 2% across the board in your rates, you may not have as many hours, as many people, as many whatever. So that's still technically a cut. And so those are the kind of things that when she talks about this is a huge important issue, because when I saw this, I was like, because I'm looking at the serious amount of growth over the last, and this is literally 1.5 after 2 or 3 years in the 4s.
Yes. For the division, yeah.
For the division. Sorry.
So Autism Society takes phone calls all the time from families. Usually because they're getting cut or making denied service. So if you want to refer people to us, we don't have any government contracts. We're free to speak the truth in a way that you might not feel that comfortable. And
I don't have that problem.
we have a pretty good success rate of helping families go to care clinical plan.
Beautiful.
So just saying that it can be done.
Well, and I foresee, Cynthia, I think you're right. I foresee that could potentially really
It's not like I
Start to
don't
be
think
a
we'll go out
push.
to eat.
Right.
see. I'm telling you, it's
Yeah.
just
This is how they cut services.
they're trying exactly. They're trying to back into a number, and I hate that. I hate that because how are you actually able to back into the number if you're looking at your own growth? And I get it, the governor has to do that, and they're trying to back Medicaid, period. They're trying to say this is the max that we will get as a state. And I get it, but at the same time, what does that do for people who have the need? But, I mean, last year, 17% alone was an increase in autism. 17% autism, not group homes, not DTA, none of those autism services. So when I saw that, I was like, I don't understand what they are today. Because I was thinking, how could they possibly have that?
Right.
Also, if your clients are getting an NOA, one of the things that I'm hearing a lot lately, and they didn't.
What's an NOA? Sorry.
If they're not getting NOA, so they're denying the service for.
Yeah.
Our first thing is like, well, where's your NOA? Why didn't you get it? Okay, well, we didn't actually ask for the service. And they're denying you, and then there's no record of denial. So it's really important that educating your families about that.
Absolutely.
What do you think the support coordinators, I'm always trying to understand like what they're trying to do and how much of it is just culture and sort of like groupthink versus
Well, the problem
this is what you say when this is what you're asked.
they
You know
have
what
to
I
go
mean?
to their supervisor for not following any of the policies. So
Got it.
they don't really have a lot of freedom
So I
to
mean,
make decisions anyway.
we get things.
But they don't even have their own policies, so we train our parents to say, that's a lovely policy, can I see it in life? Sure. And the sport coordinators usually have to go back to the supervisor, to even see the policies, they've never seen it, they don't know. And the turnover rate is so high. And then you have like a few people who stay, and I feel like they're competing, trying to show just how much money they can save.
Well, it's generational.
Yes.
I'm curious if there really is like that
For sure.
pressure on them or.
I think the question is.
There's a lot of pressure on me, but I get called all the time. You know, when I first started, the respite service, it was 720 hours. Then they cut it to 120 hours down to 600. And see, so many people actually don't care. And the children, this what they need respite service. 12 and a half hours really not benefiting people at all. So they're cutting it down. Rehabilitation service, now they want people to have group homes. Go ahead and start doing their own matrix, break the hours.
That's right.
15 minutes down at a time. That's right. So, like, and a support critic, I may, support critic, I may have 20 support critics change within 2 months.
Mm-hmm.
Well, here's the thing, at the end of the day, central office is really not. So if you're running into these problems, north, south, east, west, it doesn't matter. Central office is where it comes from. And we do talk to them every single month, we meet with them every single month, and, have these types of discussions, but they need specific examples. Because if we just say things like, oh, in PDD South, they're all denying blah, 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 they're gonna be like, okay. We need, and it's not to get anybody in trouble, but what we'll do is we'll try to train that person. Because a lot of times it's generational information from somebody that used to be there, the policies have changed and they're right there. Or it's somebody, I call them rogue. But I mean, that are trying to like, they've gone rogue. And I mean, Leah and I, Dixon and I laugh, we just laugh about that because I'm always, he's bad, and she's like, what?
Yeah.
So as long as we can give those types of things, and when those things happen, let us know, let Mary know. I mean, we'll put Mary's information out there.
And we're collecting data for a possible so if you want to report to Autism Society, we're sharing keyword data that we can report that. And the only thing I'll add is every single family that I've helped that's gone to a parent hearing, the state has agreed to settle right outside the hearing before the parents.
That's how it works.
So it's really important that people know that.
Just walk up to the steps and stop, because they'll meet you there. And then it'll be like, oh, yeah. So you're not doing things for
Exactly right.
So is that like we've never lost the case kind of thing?
Yeah.
Because they've never actually
They don't ever want to actually, because we're waiting for the case that we can sue them on.
Yeah.
So, and they know we're waiting for the case that we can sue them on.
Wow.
So I'm telling you, it never fails. They're right there, right before the judge goes in and they sign something that's really out the desk.
Do you guys have a branch like up in northern Arizona?
The Flagstaff office closed. They had a chapter up there that didn't belong to us. We've offered to take over that area. And if anyone can help us, I'm willing to drive up there once a quarter and hold support group meetings.
Nice.
But do that, but we don't have a location and we don't have a way to get information out to the family.
Actually, we could probably even do.
So if people can help us, Autism Society is completely willing, and me personally, completely willing to go up there and create something up there.
I really think that it's a big need. I'm from Guthrie, we only work down here in the valley.
Right.
But I'm from northern Arizona in a small town up there, and my friend's son has autism. And doing like what I do down here, I've been doing it for 11 years. I was like, sure, I'll attend your ISP, like I'll help you come up with goals. And we've been told he's now 6 for almost 4 years now, that they do not give facilitation services to anyone under the age of 18.
I just want to punch that person.
No, that's,
And
it's like,
I'm like,
no
that's
coordinator.
a lie.
Yeah.
And I've gone to.
I think that's all.
My brother is on the ECB there.
Yeah, I also, yeah, and you go up there and like we have families that go from here up north, like Sholo area especially, and their services get cut
cut it by more than in half. And I have a school coordinator come in and it wasn't even annual. I go up for the annuals. I have 2 families at home. Then move from here up there, and I still kept them. And I go up there, and I go for the annual, and I go for the 6 months, and I go for the 2 reviews in the middle, and that's just too hard. But at one of the 90-day reviews, they said, your daughter can get herself dressed. She does not qualify for extended care services. And I was like, what are you talking about? She can't feed herself. If she would get dressed in a bra and underwear and think that was perfectly fine, and you want to take away all services. And it took me like 4 months of fighting, and we got the services back, but they still never gave back what she had. And
those types of exact scenarios, we need to get in writing for the coalition and because we can then say, you got a real problem. And this is what your problem is, because now we've got not just 2 or 3 stories, but maybe 3 or 4 different school coordinators in this area who don't know who have some issues and will have to be retrained. And there's a lot of retraining.
yeah, and then the support coordinators in the unit, like we had one, they were trying to tell us, the 600 between 2 ISP days. Like they're trying to tell us you can't do it. And I had a whole unit, like we ended up going up to Leah, and we ended up having to have them, like the whole unit retrained.
Is great.
And now anytime I call the unit, they.
And that's good. And they'll talk to me, I'll just call Leah. And then Leah can call you. And then I'll call Dr. Bob, and then I'll call Dr. Lee.
And also know that we have an email and phone support. So we have our parent programs, we have phone support, we also have Facebook group, where everybody just asks questions and gets advice and talks about what they have a problem, what the actual law is. So we'll do like feedback there as well. Because we're trying to connect. I think actually a lot of companies.
Yeah.
Which there is a chapter down there, but they don't have the same program. So feel free to get out our number. I always respond within 24 hours.
How do you keep up with it? I mean, you guys just get thousands of calls?
Yeah, I get a lot of calls. Ask my family, they're like, oh God.
Another call.
Randy has to leave at 11:30. I'm super sorry.
No, it's okay.
You want to finish up?
This is good.
And we can talk.
No, you guys, this is good.
No, you're fine. I just realized.
We talked about this, but just want to make sure you all saw. So access provider rate cuts, that's the link. So it'll be up on the website. It'll be in the presentation. And comments are due by the 15th. If anybody was planning on submitting. This is the provision that I talked about that came from Indiana. So this was in the budget. So this is another provision where access is going to be asking for certain types of limits. Again, in the acute care plan, so not in the all text plan, but it's important for us to watch what they're doing and what, if anything gets approved, and what that might roll down to for all text.
And how's it in Indiana roll down to their?
So Indiana is just apples and oranges for Indiana because they just don't have the same type of program that we do. In fact, they basically set up an HSA type of program in their Medicaid plan. So very different than what we have here. So it's hard to compare the two. They just don't. So wanted to bring up a few things for you all to consider as you're looking forward after this legislative session and what's going to happen over the next year or so. So reminder, the legislature has to look at 3 fiscal years at a time when it does its budget. So that's why we talked about, they implemented a cap on fiscal year 17 and 18, but it isn't really actual until the next legislature adopted it if they wanted to, but they have to look at those 3 fiscal years. So you always hear folks talk about, well, we may not have a deficit this year, but we're going to have a deficit in 2 years. Or, they use that argument and they use what might happen in the next 2 fiscal years as a way to potentially keep growth smaller in a current year because of something that might happen in that 3rd year, for example. So when we started out with the fiscal year 16 budget that was adopted in March, it had a $1 million balance when they passed it in March. Good. Yeah.
So I'm sorry. The three years at a time.
Yes.
And we talked about, I get that part, but I'm curious because it's based on assumed or projected revenue.
Yes. Right.
And do we have any analytics that's going to show us what the projected revenue is versus, or like say the last 3 years, where they say, oh, we're going to have a revenue of $3 bazillion,
right.
And we have a budget of $2 bazillion. Do we have something that shows actual versus projected, or?
So yeah, so the Joint Legislative Budget Committee, so the Legislative Budget Office and the Office of Strategic Planning and Budgeting, so the Governor's Budgeting Office, they do produce reports. So so you can go back and look at a report and it'll show you what was adopted and then what was the actual. It's not readily available. It's something you've got to, go find out in those reports. But what's interesting, Governor Brewer actually, so in her last year, this was one of the things that was in her presentation for last year for budget, is her budget analyst had, here was our revenue estimate, here's where revenue came in, here was the legislature's revenue estimate, and basically showed that their revenue estimate over her tenure was more accurate than what the legislative revenue estimate. So it has been used, and they have talked about it, but it isn't something that, we use. That number is the number that's in the budget. So the revenue number that they are facing and what they're going to say is growth, it's all debatable.
Right.
So it's all based on estimates that their budget analysts give them, and then it's based off the political issues that are happening at the time that the legislature and the governor come to an agreement on.
And
That's where you get that number.
Oh, every year, Super Bowl in Arizona.
Have they done a cap before, prior to this? Did it change?
The cap on capitation.
Right.
And access specifically.
Right.
This is the first time I've seen a cap on the capitation because they can't really do, the legislature can't cap it. I know this is weird. Access puts it together, but they can make the cuts. I mean, essentially doing the same thing. If you tell the agency, again, kind of what they did with the 5% cut, you need to cut 5% out, you need to cut 10% out, which we saw before.
They're saying it's our intent to cap it out at 1.5%. Wherever that falls down, we'll back it into that number. So if that means you get a 2% cut, and you get a whatever on whatever, they're basically telling us that's their intent.
Right, they're basically, that shows me, they're telegraphing that they need to get more money out of Access and DHS in the next budgets. I mean, that's what it says to me.
Yep.
So our March collections were up from a state perspective, so that's good. Our collections have been growing a little bit. So we now have a $33 million balance, which is great, right? We're growing.
So like surplus?
Surplus. Yeah, surplus. So based off of the budget that was enacted, expenditures minus revenues, do we have any money left over? Right, and that's where you get that number from. Kind of answer your point. So all these are estimates, right? A 1% change in the actual number is $575 million difference over those 3 years. Right?
So nothing, we're saying.
So right. So I mean, if we're 1% off in our growth number, we've changed the budget deficit or the budget, surplus by
About 500.
So again, estimates. So this is where we are right now, specific numbers. So this comes from the Joint Legislative Budget Committee. The JLBC has what's called the Finance Advisory Committee. It's made up of economists from the U of A, NAU, a private economist, and their own in-house economists that come up with growth numbers, and they take a look at what's been happening. So this is where they're at right now. So if you look at fiscal year 16, so the second column, right now, they're saying $33 million is what we have left for the fiscal year that we're going into. We'll have a surplus. We'll have a negative in 17, and then 18 will come back. So that's kind of where we're at right now, but I want to show you guys. So there was a bill this legislative session, the IRS conformity bill, that impacts this. So a couple of years ago, Governor Brewer signed into law a bill temporarily that made what we do here in Arizona for the equipment deduction for small businesses equal to what the federal government did. So the amount that you can deduct was equal to the federal government, and that had a negative impact on the state income tax. It's a savings. So that was temporary. They tried to make it permanent, and Governor Brewer vetoed that bill that would have made it permanent in order to take the savings and help fund CS, the new Department of Child Safety. So by vetoing that bill, she was able to take that money and then help fund CS. Right. This year, Governor Ducey signed a bill that puts it back in, Senate Bill 1188. So now we're going back. Now they can deduct more like they can at the federal level. So we have an income tax hit here in Arizona at a cost of $31 million annually. So our $33 million savings that we had, our surplus is now $3 million.
Ooh!
See, for fiscal year 16. and then it rolls, right? And so now we're into negatives now in 17. We weren't before. Now we talk about K-12 education. So as you all know, there's a lawsuit going on for K-12 education. School districts sued the state and they won. The state did not fund inflation according to the statutory formula. And so what is happening right now is the parties involved are in mediation over what that amount will actually be. The state has lost. They have to fund it, but we don't know what that amount will actually be. If the worst case scenario happens and they have to fund full inflation, let's just say mediation breaks down and they say, nope, the court says you have to pay the full amount. This current, for fiscal year 16 that we're going to go into, the state owes an additional $262 million because they put $74 million in the budget and the total amount is the $336 annual. Okay. So for fiscal year 16, let's just say worst case scenario because that's the easiest to use, $262 million more is owed for 16. In 17, it's $336 million. 18 is $336 million. It's $336 million going forward, right? So now we're in this deficit. So now we've got a $260 million deficit in 16, the fiscal year we're going into, the fiscal year that we already passed a budget on.
But that's only 0.5%.
That's 0.5%, right? Looking at the bright side.
Basically break even.
Right. So we don't know where the K-12 lawsuit's going to end up, right? We don't know what that number is going to look like, but it's going to be somewhere in this range. The state's most likely going to owe more money than the $74 million that they put in the budget. There's probably somewhere in between, right? In between the $262 million and the 74 that they put in place. So we assume, unfortunately, these numbers are going to stay negative and probably be negative.
So they don't have to back pay for previous.
So they do. I was going to bring that up. So the other piece of this that there's no way to calculate it is there were 2 or 3 fiscal years in which the state didn't fund inflation, right? So does the state owe the school districts that money? They haven't decided that yet. The court will start hearing that later this year. If the state loses that piece of it, it's an additional $1.2 billion over a period of time. So that's not even in those numbers that you all saw because, of course, the court case hasn't happened, and I wanted to bring up some other issues. I think it's really important for the coalition to just have in mind all these things impact services and the money that are provided. So there's the Medicaid lawsuit that's still going on. To remind everybody, this is the lawsuit where the legislature is suing that we passed Medicaid expansion and restoration. There were the legislators that voted no on expansion are the ones that are suing. They're saying, what's that? To my knowledge, the governor backed out. So the Governor Ducey is no longer named in the lawsuit. It's only Tom Betlock, Director of Access, that is now named in the lawsuit. That's why we're So oral arguments are happening soon. What happens with this is if the legislators win and Access loses, essentially, we lose Medicaid restoration and expansion. So, we had all those folks kicked off, thousands and thousands of folks kicked off of Medicaid before. What does that do to the state? What does that do to insurance and to healthcare and all those things? Fiscal impact wise, it really doesn't do a whole lot because the way that this is funded right now is through the hospital assessments. So hospitals are paying for Medicaid expansion, but what is the trickle down effect to the program and the folks that then don't have coverage? What does that do to access? Then you all have probably heard the U.S. Supreme Court is going to be hearing arguments on, so this is the Obamacare healthcare subsidy, right? So there are states like Arizona where we do not have a state exchange. We are on the federal exchange. And the way the law is written, there's debate about whether or not those folks on the federal exchange can get the healthcare subsidies, which is what's helping them fund and be able to pay for their insurance. Because of the state subsidies. So what happens there? Depending on how that court case goes, what does that do to the individuals here in Arizona? Do they get their subsidies? Do they not? What happens to our program? Arizona will not implement a state exchange. It just won't. One, because the governor just signed a bill that says they can't. But also, well, that was a big problem. But also because we just never would have. The cost for doing a state exchange when the state looked into it was enormous, and all of the grants had dried up at the federal level. Arizona had actually applied for a couple of the planning grants, to do a state exchange. They had gotten the first one to start studying, essentially, had applied for the second one, and now all that money is dried up, so those grants don't even exist any longer. So to pay for that in a state budget deficit time, it's almost impossible. And then, and you're probably going to have to remind me, it's been a while since we talked about this, but the Department of Labor did some rules on how folks are paid. Overtime, exactly.
The overtime, the drive time, where in the very last hour.
Yes.
They came back and said, one court justice said, no, we're good, let's hold on this for a little bit. And you're like, wait, what? And so.
Yeah, this was supposed to go into effect on January 1. Right.
But now the Department of Labor is like, yeah,
they're appealing.
don't get too excited.
So this
They
is all
have
still
told
in
us-
limbo.
They have told us this is coming. They are like, oh, that's.
The Department of Labor actually already has written a letter to states saying, we're appealing, we believe we will win, you should prepare.
Be ready for it.
Be ready
Question
for
on
it.
that, when we looked at the drive time piece of it, there was like, I think it was an FAQ sheet that the Department of Labor put up.
Yeah.
And they said like, this really isn't related, it's just something that providers weren't aware they should have been doing all along. Is
Well,
that true?
no, the issue is that, so this rolls into a couple different things, only because we have, let's talk about that in a second. Randy, I know you guys.
No. You guys keep talking, I just have to do text and we'll be fine. Okay, we're good.
So, so that rolls into a couple of things, because they'll also tell you the first time they drive in the morning and the last time they drive at night, you don't have to worry about that, okay? Then they talk about, are they a subcontractor, or are they an actual employee? Then they talk about, are you doing their schedule, or are they doing their own schedule? Have you assigned the client, have you not assigned the client? Are they able to make modifications to their schedule? Because even though they're an employee, that makes them exempt. So that makes, it's not a very like, oh, here you go. There's questions that have been asked about it. The issue that we have, we were super excited, obviously, we're like, which no one expected was December 23rd. December 23rd, whenever we set the stuff up. But, and you were like, oh my God, this is awesome. Well, the Department of Labor is seriously like, now, yeah, they are irritating to no end. And so they, like Randy had said, they're very
Aggressive.
They're almost
very
threatening, like, yeah, you know what, you better, I hope you're doing this because we're gonna come and get you now. It's the minute that they say that they can. So just keep it on the back burner for now. Well, obviously, we had that whole big meeting here to say, these are the things that are coming and we gotta make sure we're doing it. And then the one, out of all of them, that one was huge. That got overturned at the last 9 hours or 11 hours, which is great. And now it's looking,
It's not done.
it's not.
Right, it's not done, obviously, and so it's something that we all need to continue to watch and watch what happens in the court
When do
cases.
we know when you feel
Is there a time?
You know, I don't know. I need to go back and look and see if, I don't remember if anything's
I don't
been
even
put
know
out.
if it's slated. I'm assuming.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm guessing it has, but I haven't. We'll have to go back and look. If we can find out, we'll make sure we get it out. Thank you. So additional federal rules that I think you all should be aware of as well. So this is the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. That's the federal law that was passed. And then there are rules that the Department of Education and the Department of Labor have now written to implement that act.
WIOA, you'll hear that a lot.
Yes.
No one ever says it.
And so this makes changes in both rehab, it makes changes in state supported employment services programs, it makes changes in adult education programs, talks about minimum wage, a whole host of issues are enveloped in the WIOA and then the rule package. So what I've done here is these are links to the different rule packages that are out, so then you guys will have them on your website and just go click and look through them. The federal government is asking for public comment now, so the public comment period is now open. I believe it ends on June 15th at 60 days. And then the Department of Economic Security here in Arizona is also asking for comments. So I think it's really important that groups take a look at these, see what the impacts might be to the different services that are provided, and provide comments. This is another one where comments are really, really important. I know APAD is taking a look at it. A lot of the national groups are taking a look at them. They're obviously complicated, right? This is a complicated issue, and coming from the federal government, federal rules are complicated. So APAD specifically is looking at a lot of national groups and saying, hey, can you help us figure all this out too? But I think it's really important that everybody's aware that these are major changes that could be coming down in the programs as well. So then we also have access in federal rules. So you all know that the federal government, Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services, CMS, passed rules on home and community-based services, right? So access here, and I'm sure you guys have talked about this, is looking at, they have an internal work group that's comparing the CMS rules to what we have in Arizona. So our rules, our statutes, our guidelines, everything that they have ever produced in access and DB on home and community-based services and DHS.
The only thing that CMS has rolled out at this point is for 1915.
Yes.
1115 hasn't been touched, but there's so much mirroring going on. That's why DES, DBD, and Access all have work groups to make sure that those rules are being followed. And this is going to affect us, but more so, not so much in-home type services. I don't think they need tweaks here and there because we do a lot, but more so on like developmental home side, group home side, privilege, it's gonna have to move.
Yeah.
Because it's not integrated. I mean, there's a few pieces like that that will definitely, if the 1915, if 1115 follows the 1915, then those are the things that we're gonna probably be talking about.
This is probably way more detail than you guys want, but so Arizona's Medicaid waiver comes up for renewal every 10 years. So our Medicaid waiver expires next year. So they have to put in their first draft a year before it goes up. So you basically have a year of negotiations. So Access is planning to submit their draft waiver by October 1 of this year. Because the federal fiscal year. And so because these rules, again, as Ann said, don't apply to 1115 yet, but it says on the 1915 side, so on other state side, if you have to amend or change your waiver, you need to put this in. We're assuming, and Access is assuming that they're still going to have to. So why wait until you're told to is essentially what they're doing. They might as well go through the process. So their plan is to have some public comment on what they're looking at over hopefully the summer. They were hoping to have it start now, but they've been delayed in what they're doing internally. So I think June or July is when we'll see this. But it'll also be another time for public comment and for the coalition to take a look at what those assessments say. Because what this is going to say is, how does Arizona mirror up with the federal rules, and then what do we need to do to change it? In some cases, like you said, it might just be that we need to tweak our policies. The policy manual may just need to be tweaked a little bit to make it fit. In other cases, there could be wholesale changes that have to work integration, for example. And so those are things that we all need to be taking a look at and watch and wait for that public comment period as well. So that'll be happening sometime this summer.
Also on Access, they're doing, the All Text Advisory Council and Access is working on a survey. So I don't know if you all, I don't know, Anthony, you've seen this, I don't know if anybody's seen it yet, but they're supposed to be putting it out to members and to providers to talk about the CMS rules as well. So just be on the lookout for that, that Access is asking for participation in that, and it's part of those CMS home and community-based rules. So also happening in Access, so there's an independent contractor work group that actually Ann and I are going to this week. There was a bill in this legislative session that would have allowed independent contractors to operate in Access freely, if you will. Basically, Access really wouldn't have any say over what they're doing. That bill did not go forward. The agreement was that they would try and work over it over the summer and try and find, is there a middle ground in Access where you could have an independent contractor type model in Access that still has the accountability that Access and the federal government requires, still make sure that the individual is being taken care of properly and that the families know what's happening. So that work group is meeting to see if there is some way to do that. We don't know. I don't know what this will turn out to be, but just want to make sure you are all aware that that's happening.
So that bill that was going around, it
did not go forward. Right.
So basically, employees that you would have, their employees are fine. Anybody who hires a subcontractor, there's an issue with it. And it's not that you can't have subcontractors. There are certain, that's what we're talking about. There's going to potentially be certain times when that's okay, but there are companies who look complete independent contractor model, and there's a few different issues to this. They don't want to pay insurance, well, you can't do that, so go to companies. They said this was just better for them, and they wanted this how to work. The problem is, and the question that I raised there was, okay, so I'm a member, and I have a problem with my provider, and I call you, and you're the company who subcontracts this provider, but they're their own employee, and I have a problem who I go to. And I said, there's no one to go to. I can go back to DVD and say something about it. What scares me the most is they're not registered anywhere.
And if they're attending,
There's no-
you're not supposed to train them. You're not
Right.
supposed to
Right, we're just training them.
supervise them.
Right.
It's use this to make you a true independent contractor, which is fine, but I don't want my family member being with somebody that's not listed in some database somewhere that they actually are okay to do the services that they're supposed to.
Or
be
hasn't been
doing.
properly trained.
Exactly. I mean, it's a scary, scary thing, and that's my personal opinion, and so that's where I am. So we're working on it.
Definitely. And then also, I believe you guys are probably all aware, so the governor's office, together with Access, has created the Autism Spectrum Disorder Advisory Committee. The coalition is represented on that committee, and so it's charged with making recommendations on how to strengthen the program here in Arizona. So I don't know if they've set their first meeting, but I know that's something that obviously the coalition would want to watch and see what work in see the conversations and how that work goes.
I'm on it.
What kind of things do you think you'll push for?
Macaroni and cheese for everybody. That was my first thing. You know what? I think it's gonna be more behavioral. This is my personal opinion. I think it's gonna be more behavioral health stuff. There's not learning that we need. I think there's a better way to do some of the stuff that we're doing. We got on hold, obviously. So I think it's looking at some of those kind of same thing, kind of like we're talking about, we were saying about like families who aren't getting the services and then having to do deals and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, those holes there, the holes in like
The diagnosing, the
Correct.
whole piece of
Correct.
map.
Well, and there's
everything else.
several, and you know, you read that in your armor too, right? Yeah. Yeah. So there's several docs that are involved in it. There's behavioral health people, there's PD people. So it's really trying to get it.
Lots of lawyers.
Oh my God. Ad nauseum. It was literally, I watched
Too many
it.
lawyers.
Yeah, there was like us, and then they're like, a whole lot of lawyers.
There were like
I'm
30
what
lawyers.
is happening? So Dr. Lake was like, come sit by me. Like, but I think we'll be fine. I mean,
The
I
other
think,
thing that started out as, and sort of morphed along the way, is, we've been shopping for attorneys for 10 years. The Autism Society has. We pretty much approached every large law firm in the United States, wanting to sue Access for their definition of ABA therapy for kids from only 4 to 6. We feel it's discriminatory, and the fact that the state is saying that ABA therapy is experimental over the age of 6, we find it offensive. And so we've been shopping, and we can't afford to sue them, and we couldn't find lawyers who were really that interested, but because of some of the language that's changed, all of a sudden there was lots of lawyers that were interested in changing the system and making it more accessible to children of all ages. And what has been nice to see is that I think just the threat of that and having meetings, I'm now hearing that there are some older kids who are actually getting some true ABA services. I just want to think with an 18-year-old who's getting it, which is fantastic, because those kids at that age never got it because they didn't have it in the little.
they're in the black hole.
And so we have all these kids with huge behaviors who are now giants and who sometimes CPS is going to take the kids away from the safety of the parents.
Sure.
So I'm happy to see, I'm inspired to think that maybe we'll see some changes.
That's what we're going in. We're going in positive. We're going to say this is a partnership, and we're going to make these changes together. Because I'm not a fan of lawsuits or threatening people unless they just feel like they're not doing what they're supposed to do. And then in that case, we want to give them the opportunity to step up. And if they step up and we found some different interesting ways to do things, and service flow and all that kind of stuff, we're on board. If they get all pissy and or whatever and don't take, that's when the wall of lawyers will step in. But we've really tried to say, I don't want to ruin partnerships that we've worked really hard over the last.
Although you're kind of.
No, it's not. You know what it is? It's, here's the thing, if there's even some simple changes at first that we can make, that would just make maybe a world of difference, we're definitely interested in that, because in talking to some of the higher ups within those organizations, it's not like we're like, what? I think they know it, it's just that push.
Well, it's also money.
Oh, there is no money. That's
We have the money.
you and I, oh my God.
They might be
Talking
like,
about-
sure.
Yeah, well, and that's the other thing, is that the general population doesn't understand. We get our money by gifting from the legislature. We don't have a lawsuit that we can put into to work like Department of Education did, because they haven't funded, what was it? What number is it? The inflation. We haven't had an inflation increase since 1906 for DV services, so let's be honest. I mean, the reality is, we are where we are because of the push that we have and the fact that we have such a vulnerable population that needs these services. And so we continue to push the legislature, but we have to do it because we don't have 12 laws behind this and statutory regulations. We can lean back on and say, hey, we didn't do this. Sure, we have CMS. Good luck with that. So we really have to be able
Although
to.
their language changing is not.
Well, their language changing is because I don't think they have choices. And I think that's a really good thing. And here's the good thing, is we can twist this and say, hey, not your fault. Let's blame CMS. But let's go ahead and do the things we're supposed to do. Right?
So we should see changes across the board from the ability to get diagnosis and determine the
Absolutely.
and the requirements of what that diagnosis looks like.
And where the services are
Are
closed.
you gonna look at
DV
the alt-text screening and those issues? I
Yeah,
know that
Best
we did that a couple of
practice.
years ago, but it still seems like too many families have to go through it 3 times.
It's insane, but
Yeah.
including us, because as we're having these meetings, there's on the side work going on, like maybe people are doing them.
Good times.
Right? House of cards, right?
You're
You can interesting.
This is fun, right?
Never come to a coalition meeting ever again. No to
Well,
sell.
but this is, I mean, one of the reasons I bring this up is yes, the legislature is very important, right? But so are all the things that are happening at Access and DES, and I mean, that's where a lot of this happens too. And so you have to watch it all, and you have to be cognizant of what even the agencies are doing, right? Lastly, this is the last thing I wanted to bring up. Talk about legislation for next session. So this is something that APAD and a bunch of other groups are working on. And this is Achieving a Better Life Experience, the ABLE Act. So the federal government passed this in December, allows states to set up 529A accounts. So similar to the 529 education accounts, you can then set aside money for an individual with a disability to be used for their disability services, education, housing. Tax-free, like it is on the education side, does not impact their Medicaid eligibility, and then there is a limit when it impacts Social Security. So we are looking to pass this in Arizona next session. So we
tried this session.
What happened? I know it was.
so
Oh,
this
no,
we
we
tried
tried.
this legislative
We tried.
session, but
There was no way to
because
do it with the striker.
well, yeah, we would have
And
had
with that.
to. The timing was really bad. So the session was very, very fast with the legislature, and you have deadlines, introduction deadlines. We had missed the introduction deadlines, so we've had to do a strike everything amendment, which can totally be done. It's not a problem. But on this big of an issue, you want to get it right, and you want to make sure that you have, at least this was my opinion and the advice to APAD, you want to make sure you've got the coalition and the support behind it when you move this forward and you do it right the first time.
Right.
And so we are putting together a stakeholder group in May for anybody and everybody, May 14th.
Please come.
Law?
Yeah.
In fact,
Sign
if
me
you,
up for that.
and I don't know, do you have the email? I can send it to you, Mary, and you guys can send it out. We're just asking for RSVPs to make sure we have enough tables and chairs. But we're just asking for any and all folks to come together. Our first goal is to put together what we would want our program in Arizona to look like. So there's some decision points the state needs to make. Like, for example, who's going to administer the program? Is it state administered, or do we piggyback off of another state? Are there other limits that we want to put on it? There are some other limits that you can do, and do we want to do any of those limits? So we want to have that kind of a conversation, and then we're going to try Mr. Allen, so he's the current chairman of the House Children and Family Affairs Committee.
John Allen is
Great. He's great.
We love him.
Yeah.
Just so you know.
He's going to be at the meeting, by the way. I don't know if I told you. He's
Yeah,
going to be there. And I have to, I don't know if she will, but he will definitely be there, and he's gonna help us do some draft legislation to get us started so that we can all have a conversation about it and try and figure out what the fiscal impact will be, because it will have a fiscal impact because there is savings,
Tax.
the income tax
So if
savings.
you're typically taxed and then you're all of a sudden you've got, you know, $1,000 is taken out, that's not going to sales tax or
So state income
employment
tax,
tax,
right?
right, income tax anymore. It's gonna go into this plan, which is great, but is that gonna drop $3.5 million out of the general fund? Because now we have this plan, that's an option. So there's a few details to it, and we need to figure out, like she said, what kind of plan we want and who's gonna administer. Because this could take off and be a big scary thing. right?
It could,
So,
right, I mean,
If a family already set up a 529 before they knew their child had a disability, could
so
they
if
move
the
it over?
current 529s are just for education, I
Right.
don't know what the requirements would be, and I don't know if they
I've heard
can.
that can like create a problem for.
that's what this
That's-
does.
Use it to kind of.
That's what this does.
Yeah.
And the best way to explain this, I think, in how we explain it to Representative Allen was to say, Senator Allen, Representative, was to say that it's like a mix between that, the traditional education plan and like an HSA. Because basically what you're doing is putting money aside for tax-free for your individual who qualifies for this to be able to use. They could buy a car because they got a job. They could buy, put money down on an apartment or a house. They could use the money for a myriad of things without it, the $100,000, without it saying, okay, you have $100,000 in basically the savings account, for lack of another way to say it, an able account, so we're not going to give you Medicaid money, we're not going to give you whatever. And this is a really nice, I think, a really nice option for people. And not the rich people, because they've already got stuff set up for their kids. This is, in my opinion, middle class people that even some of those, I'm from, you got 3 years later, 5 years later, you got $2,000 and your kid needs a new something, you've got money.
Well, family members can gift in, like they can in education accounts and those kinds of things, so other folks can put money
I'm
aside.
excited
Well,
about
that
this.
was even more concerned. Yeah, we didn't want to ruin his eligibility, and my
Right.
parents were like, well, we want to give him money like we give the rest of the grandkids.
Right.
And it was
Right.
like, no,
They already
you
put it.
can't.
Right.
It doesn't allow
Right.
that to happen.
And
Yeah.
that's why we wanted to be very thoughtful, because we really could have pushed it through, but there was way too much, like, we wouldn't have known anything. We wanted to really take our time this summer, get it together. John said he'd sponsor it. I mean, he's like very interested in it. He thinks it's a great idea. And, we've got Caitlin McGee, who of course is always there for us.
Very interesting.
On the other side, who has been very interested in this. So we have the people in place. The stakeholder meeting was important. So if you can make it, please do, because we really need everybody's thoughts and how we can give you some good direction and be solid when we walk in next year and say, this is what we're looking for, this is what we'll do, and this is.
So we're gonna do our homework over the summer, right? Figure out what we want, how much it's gonna cost, and then the federal government, the Treasury, and the IRS are gonna put out their guidance over the summer. So then we'll be able to take their guidance and then really probably walk in, September, October with hopefully the plan to be a really good, solid package with a lot of support behind it that then we can roll into the legislative session ready to
Has
go.
any other state passed
Yes,
legislation
yes.
already?
Yes.
So we have legislation looking at.
There is
federal
legislation.
budget.
But yes, there's a handful of states that passed it. The problem was they passed it before the Treasury and IRS did their guidance, right? So what the Treasury and IRS had to do is come out and say, don't worry, your plans can go through, but we may have to make some changes later. Your plans are still good, but we may have to make some changes to your plans later once we do our guidance. So they're still good, but it could be that the guidance makes some changes and we may not want to piggyback off of somebody else, just depending on what that guidance says, which is part of the other reason for waiting, is making sure that we don't really touch this once.
This is a huge thing though too, and I want to give big props to Brandy on this, because I literally got a phone call from Autism Speaks Washington. Can you get on a call in 10 minutes? So I got on a call in 10 minutes and they were like, okay, can you do this patch this weekend? I'm not, am I kidding?
Yeah, no, they were like,
No,
why can't we have a military
I
smell?
literally was like, well, I actually have a meeting with John Allen in 2 days, so I could always just kind of ask him. And they were like, great. And so we went, and he was like, oh, this is interesting, I kind of like this. And then as we started talking about it, then he's like, well, who's going to do the plan? I'm all Brandy. I need your help. And she jumped right on it. And Ted was like, what's going on? And they wanted it. I mean, it literally was like 3 days. We were trucking across. We saw Kate walking across the Capitol lawn, and we were like, hey, Kate. Brian, and she's like, I don't know nothing about it. It sounds great, though. And I would really be interested in this. And we just have to be more thoughtful about it. It wasn't time.
Well, and especially when it has a fiscal impact, right?
That's-
It's gonna have a
But the
fiscal
impact
impact.
doesn't have though, because it's not pre-tax dollars, right? It's like, it was in a savings account.
I don't know. So
It's
one
just like-
state, it was $1 million.
It's like a mutual fund.
Another
Yeah,
state
and then
was
it- well, 'cause
$3.5 million.
You're putting the money aside without paying the income tax. So there's a hit to the state, right? It will not collect that income tax that
Like with
year.
the 529 that I have for my kids, the money I put in it, I've already paid taxes on. It's just whatever it grows to.
Some are that way, right, and some are that way. This would be pre-tax, so you're not,
Oh,
so you're not
wow.
paying
So
the
it's more
tax,
like
right? So the
401k.
state doesn't get that state income.
Oh, that's pretty
Right.
good.
Kind of like a 401k.
It is. It's
Yeah, kind of, yeah.
You have to have.
And
that.
HSAs, and HSAs
Okay.
are set, most of them, I think, are set that way. So yeah, I mean, so we want to know what that fiscal impact is and really have a thoughtful plan going forward, because there
And
will be an
John is
impact.
very open about that, you know, we may not, maybe he guesstimates, will 100 families take it? Will 1,000 families, will 20,000 families, and are they all gonna throw 100 grand in? You know, you don't know, you have to, you have to, we're gonna have to do our due diligence, and that's kind of what the summer is for, is making sure that we do our best to give them the information, but they don't think for 1 second we're gonna be like, oh, it's $2.3 million, and they're like, okay, good. You know what I mean? It's like, definitely, we need help.
So thank you all for having me, very much appreciate it. If anything comes up, if something didn't make sense, let me know. Happy to get you all additional information, make sure we get
Well,
that.
I gave you your home number, so it should be fine.
Perfect.
No worries there, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Thanks.
Yeah.
So much for this.
You're welcome.
Got it.
Do you need some help?
Nope, that's your,
Oh, this is ours?
Yeah.
I think this is ours?
yep.
Oh.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm gonna give away a laptop. It's fine. No, laptop. Who wants it? All right, so wait a minute. We have a meeting. Right here. Yes, right here. So thank you all for coming. And we're going to be giving out this information. Obviously, it's going to be on the website. We're going to have a couple things. And then we have a couple more